Welcome to the RotoWire WNBA show, where we talk about fantasy basketball. I'm Jason Shebilske alongside Kirien Sprecher. Today, we'll discuss this weekend's action from around the league, including Caitlin Clark's return. We'll also break down some of our top trade targets as we approach the halfway of the fantasy season. And finally, we'll preview the week ahead. Those looking to subscribe to RotoWire can use the promo code YouTube15 at checkout for 15% off any RotoWire product. RotoWire has plenty of useful tools for the WNBA as well as Major League Baseball now that the season is going. We also have projections for NHL and NBA already up, and the NFL season is right around the corner. So it's a great resource to keep up with any fantasy sport that you're in, and the promo code YouTube15 will get you the best deal possible. During today's show, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments and we'll get them answered. If you ask live, we'll answer them on the show, but we'll also be active in the comments afterward to provide any additional insight. And we're also available on social media. I'm at Jason Shebilske everywhere, and Kirien is at Kirien Sprecher RW everywhere. We had a busy weekend of action around the WNBA, including both of the remaining undefeated teams falling. Kirien, what stood out to you the most this weekend?
Yeah, it was only a matter of time before we saw the undefeated teams lose. But yeah, about a quarter of the way through the regular season, and the standings are really starting to take shape. And I think, before we review last weekend, this week, there a lot of things storylines are going to be built through this next week of games. There's a lot of teams getting healthy. The Golden State in the opposite direction, losing a lot of players. A lot of big time matchups this week. But yeah, going back to last week, I think the Seattle Storm got a huge win over the Lynx. That was the game that I highlighted last Monday. As this is a litmus test for the Storm. Like, are they going to be in that top tier, or are they more towards the middle of the pack? And got a resounding win. Very convincing, and then they came down and had a huge letdown against Golden State a few days later, right? That's like the perfect trap game. You're playing a team that was in the finals, you get a big win, and then you go against the expansion team that losing a lot of players to Eurobasket, and you just fall short. You just aren't ready. You just aren't prepared for that game as much as you should have been. But Seattle means business, and even with that loss, I think they're better than anticipated. But you just can't have games like that get away. Losing to Golden State basically negates the win over Minnesota, right? Because going into that week, you're like, well, lose to Minnesota, beat Golden State 1-1. That's a good week. You kind of went about it the opposite, reversed way, but you ended up the week 1-1. So really nothing gained, nothing lost for Seattle, even though they had a big win and a big loss too.
Yeah, with Golden State especially, so if you bet the over on their preseason win total at 9.5 wins, that looks like about a lock at this point since they're sitting at 5-5. And I think we're getting close to the point where we should start talking about, are the Valkyries a playoff team for this year? I saw a tweet today, and I don't remember who it was from, unfortunately, but they basically said, with all of the moving pieces in Golden State this year, if the Valkyries are even in playoff contention toward the end of the year, it feels like Natalie Nakase has to be a lock for Coach of the Year. That she's done an incredible job with a lot of moving pieces, a lot of veteran players and younger players as well, just learning a new system. And so far, it's kind of gone off without a hitch. A few hiccups here and there, but that was to be expected. And I think we expected a lot more bumps in the road from the Valkyries early on than have actually happened.
Yeah, I would absolutely co-sign, endorse, whatever the term you want to use, that statement. Even if Golden State is flirting with playoff contention, I feel like I would endorse that. It's going to be interesting. I feel like at this point, if you go into a game against Golden State and you aren't expecting a dogfight, then that's on you. Like there's no more like, oh, this team got surprised by Golden State, or like they just made some shots today. Like Golden State is coming for your throat. And like you said, no matter who's in the lineup, they're playing tough. And that might get tricky, towards the end of the season once you get everybody healthy again. And then it's not so much like that desperation, like, oh, next player up, like just keep on churning them out. And then you get the competition for playing time and what's the right lineups, whatever. There's no real like lead dog in Golden State. So it'll be interesting. But yeah, absolutely incredible starts to the season. And I it's brave of you to say it now. I thought you were going to wait to call your shot until after they got a little bit closer. But yeah, you said over 9.5 was your favorite bet heading into the season, and a quarter of the way through the season, they're halfway there. That seems like pretty good progress to me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think heading into the season, because the Chase Center, I believe that they sold out all season tickets. And I think it's a packed house every night that they're at home. So my expectation heading into the season was that like the Chase Center would be able to carry the Valkyries to some wins. But the fact that they have the talent to compete as well as Valhalla on their side is just a crazy combo early in the year.
Yeah, and I think this start, obviously we'll see where this goes, but this is just, another fact, another reason as to why we were all right, and all of the analysts saying that this league, there's so much talent that's not in the league right now. Consistently every year, some of the top draft picks don't even make a roster as a rookie, and this just shows you that an expansion team, they don't have a superstar. They're losing half their team to Eurobasket. Players keep coming in, keep producing, and it just shows you that there is a lot of talent in the women's basketball sphere, and another team or two is on the horizon for sure, especially with the way that the Golden State has started.
For sure. And speaking of the cream of the crop talent around the WNBA, even though the Lynx took their first loss of the season this past week, Nafisa Collier hasn't shown any signs of slowing down even during that loss. She appears to be the clear front runner for the MVP award at this point. Since her one-game absence to close out May, she's posted at least 46 ESPN fantasy points in 4 of 5 appearances, and she's also recorded multiple stocks in 4 of those 5 outings. So I know fantasy points aren't always the biggest indicator of like whether a player will be in MVP contention, but Nafisa Collier has been right in the mix, and it seems like this is her year as long as she can stay healthy throughout the season.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting, to see where the standings fall. But right now, the Lynx are the best team, if not one of the best teams. Or I spilled my guts there a little bit. I think the Lynx are the best team in the league right now. Natasha Cloud has kind of cooled off a little bit for the Liberty. I still think that's a great addition. But yeah, she's the best player on the best team right now. I don't see that changing anytime soon. And then you look at like the other top MVP candidates. The top producers, the Kelsey Plums, the Satu Sabalis aren't necessarily on the best teams right now. And then the best teams have, Asia Wilson missing some games. They have Jackie Young playing well. The Ace is one of the best teams. I still consider them one of the best teams. I know they're 500, that Asia Wilson's been hurt, whatever, but you get what I'm saying. The best teams have a lot of good players, so that there's not like one like superstar production, where Kahleah is that clear number one on the best team. Talking about another cream of the crop player, Paige Bueckers. We have to talk about her return from a lengthy absence, concussion and then illness, missed 4 games, came back and dropped 35 last week, 13 for 19 shooting. That's incredible for anybody. And then you mentioned, coming back from an injury, and then she's a rookie, right? So that was just a really, really special performance. Then, only had 16 points and 5 assists in her next game. Like, what is that? But like for rookie standards, a 16.5 assist game is a very, very solid game. Dallas can't guard anybody, but they should be really excited about this offense with Paige Bueckers and Enrique Agumbawale.
Absolutely. And even though Bueckers missed those 4 games due to concussion and illness, I think that she should still be considered the clear front runner for MVP. For Rookie of the Year. I'm sorry, not quite MVP for Paige Bueckers, but there are some solid rookie performances around the league, including Washington's combo of Sony Citron and Kiki Iriafen. But I think that even with the missed games, what Paige Beckers is doing is incredible. And I think that she still stands in like a tier above the rest, even when there are some solid performances from others. I also thought that Caitlin Clark might show some rust following her 5 game absence, or at least like beyond a minutes restriction. She did wind up playing a season low minutes count, I guess, at 31 minutes, and she was playing against a talented team in the Liberty. But she posted a season high 62 ESPN fantasy points Saturday and came close to a triple double. So just goes to show you should never doubt Caitlin Clark. She'll prove you wrong 9 times out of 10, and most times 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was so fitting, just the way and the energy she had, the way she was playing and the energy she had. I said last Monday that she felt like the kid that, like twists the ankle and the doctor's like, well, just be cautious. And they're like, I'm a kid, like I want to run around, I want to play. And you could tell like she's kind of playing it out early, and then she kind of caught fire when the Liberty took a little bit of a lead. And when she caught fire, she was just a kid on the playground again, right? There's 9 other professional athletes on the court, a stadium full of fans, blah, 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 blah. It was just Caitlin at playing basketball at that point. She didn't think about anyone else. And that's what makes her so special, because she can go that supernova mode where it's just her against, the world. And she comes through more times than not. Real quick, we talked about Kahleah, we talked about Caitlin Clark. Going to talk about, the aces and A'ja Wilson here in a little bit. Let's just talk about the MVP conversation quickly, if that's cool. Because I said some things, but I was kind of all over the place. So right now, Kahleah is the clear favorite at -400. Clark is +275. Stewart +4,000, and A'ja Wilson +5,500. So it's really just a 2-person race at this point. And the second person behind Kahleah, Clark, has missed time already due to injuries. If she keeps up this production that she had against the Liberty, yeah, it could get closer. But Kahleah is also doing that type of thing on a nightly basis too. Do you think there a third player could emerge from this group?
I think that at this point, it would probably take either another multi-game absence for Caitlin Clark, or like a multi-game absence for Napheesa Collier, as well as potentially like the Lynx slipping up more than they have. I think that like Caitlin Clark, during her absence, seeing how much the Fever struggled, it kind of solidified her case for MVP a little bit more. I think that it's certainly possible that like A'ja Wilson or Breanna Stewart at least improve their odds from where they're at right now. But I think that especially since we're coming off of years where it was A'ja Wilson MVP, and then the year before that Breanna Stewart MVP, I think that it's just natural for voters to want to look for like a new name to put on the award. And it's certainly shaping up that it'll be very easy to make that case for probably Collier, but also Clark if the cards fall right.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it in the aspect that the Fever were just really, really bad when Clark wasn't playing. Collier's missed 1 game this season, and Minnesota won 74-71. So I think right now that's probably the difference maker is Caitlin's missed more games. But if that missed games mark gets closer, Kahleah misses another game or two, you could make the argument that Caitlin deserves it because she was the more valuable player to her team. But I would also say, like, if you played both seasons out, neither one of those teams is going to be a championship contender. I would say maybe the Lynx probably would have better odds to be a playoff team, but I don't think either of those teams is really going to win a championship. So I think they're still both very, very, very valuable to their own team. So talking about MVPs, it's only fitting to transition to A'ja Wilson, right? I guess. So people are going to be talking poorly about the Aces, and it's probably warranted. They're just not up to their standard recently. A'ja, they lost, and then A'ja played in that game, and then she missed 2 more games. Jewel Lloyd still trying to find her way on her fit on this team. And then, Sunday, Phoenix was just at full strength. Satu Sabally, 22 points, 9 rebounds, Alyssa Thomas, 14 points, 13 assists, 6 rebounds. Kahleah Copper scored 11 points in 18 minutes in her season debut. So like, watch out for the Mercury. That team gets hot. They had a bunch of role players have forced into like heavy minutes recently, and I think that just helps them get battle tested. Right now, all of a sudden, the Mercury go from this team that's just throwing out players in the starting lineup, like who's going to start on a nightly basis, to oh my gosh, they're really deep, and they have 12 players that have played 20 minutes this season and can impact the team. So I think, yes, the Aces have struggled and they're not playing up to their standard. But I think it's not, I'm not going to say it's an unlucky start. They're not playing well. But I think things will start turning their way eventually, especially when A'ja Wilson gets back to full strength.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in the grand scheme of things, both teams will be just fine in the long run, but the Mercury are definitely a talented team. And speaking of the Mercury, we're entering the 5th week of the fantasy season, which is probably a good time to start thinking about putting some trades together. And you mentioned that Kahleah Copper returned to action Sunday, and I think that she could certainly be worth trading for. She had one of the most dominant years of her career with the Mercury last season, and even though the team improved during the offseason by acquiring Alyssa Thomas and Satu Sabali, they also lost Brittany Griner and Diana Taurasi. So Copper had a relatively light workload during her season debut Sunday, posting 11 points, 2 rebounds, an assist, and a steal in 18 minutes. But her playing time should steadily improve as she regains her conditioning, and this may be one of the few remaining times that you can get her at a discount. I know that probably if you're looking at the ideal time to trade, it maybe would have been a few weeks ago where she's still in the midst of her injury absence, but she's coming off a pretty light performance during her season debut. So maybe her fantasy manager is a little bit frustrated, dealt with some losses early in the season. So if like, I think that this will be one of the few times this year where like people will be doubting Kahleah Copper's dominance, because especially with Diana Taurasi now not in the picture, there should be plenty of shot opportunities for Kahleah Copper, and she has the chance to be a really stellar fantasy contributor.
Yeah, I think you nailed it when you said, this is when her fantasy value would probably be the lowest, right? Like everybody's all excited for her to come back, and then she comes back and she scores only 11 points in 18 minutes, and they're like, "Oh, I don't want to deal with this if she's going to play limited minutes." Alyssa Thomas, Satu Sabali, they're playing well. So yeah, I think this is the perfect time to, go out and acquire Kahleah Copper. My only other note is that Phoenix has played 12 games. They're one of 3 teams that's already played 12 games. There's 6 teams that have played 10, and then the rest have played 11. So there is that, a little bit of what's the word, like just gamesmanship there, right? Like this was a bigger deal last year. I think the Fever started off and they had played like 8 games before anyone had played 5 games or something. So there was like a little bit of, variables there that changes. This isn't that big of a difference. But it is something just worth mentioning. But yeah, Copper's still a fine target to go after. My first player is Angel Reese. I'm gonna double down on the Angel Reese situation. My hot take ahead of the season was that Angel Reese would receive multiple MVP votes, or maybe I said like 5. She got one last year. But the narrative around Reese like hasn't been great this season, and that's efficiency is down again, but she was a very, very good fantasy player last year when that was the case. And this guy can't win games. So those 2 factors it's just a bad narrative, but the stats are still there. She's averaging slightly fewer rebounds and points per game, but still averaging a double-double, and her defense and playmaking has picked up. Just dropped her first career triple-double. Like I said, I expect that part of her game to improve this season. And if she can get back her rebounding and points back to where they were last season, and we're talking about a point or 2 difference, like it's not like she's playing way worse than last year. If she can start, getting closer to that 15-point mark regularly and getting, 12 plus rebounds, she's averaging fewer than 12 right now, averaged, 13 last year and led the league. But if she can increase, if she can get back to scoring and rebounding like she did last year, and then maintaining what she's doing in the playmaking and defensive department, she's going to be one of the top fantasy contributors over the next month or 2. And again, she the Sky have only played 10 games. So she has 2 extra games than, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Dallas. And that can go a long ways, especially with a player like Reese, who is very capable of a 60, point fantasy night.
Absolutely. And Reese, I don't think that she's quite in the tier of like the Nafisa Colliers of the world and like the Caitlin Clarks, where night in and night out, they're probably posting at least in the 40s for fantasy points. Angel Reese is a little bit more inconsistent. And part of that is because of the team that she's on, just with the Sky struggling so much this year. But Courtney Vandersloot being out for the season, Vandersloot was a veteran that the Sky could lean on to help to pick up some of the production. And now with her out, there's a lot of question marks of just like who will step up. I think Angel Reese is one of those players that, even though she's already stepped up in the past, the fact that she posted a triple double on Sunday is really encouraging, and she should have a lot more opportunities to really take on a leading role for the Sky as the season rolls on now.
They just got to start winning some games.
Right, for sure. Staying on the Sky, Jeff Whiteley is asking our thoughts on Hailey Van Lith. Now that Courtney Vandersloot is out for the season, I think that Van Lith will have a lot more opportunities to be thrown into the fire than she did. I think that the last 4 games, so Vandersloot has now been sidelined for 3. She was out for most of the 4th to last game for the Sky. Of the last 4 games, Van Lith has played at least 16 minutes in 3 of those games. And in the other game, she played just 4 minutes, and that was the loss to the Dream on Friday night. So I think that it really shows that Van Lith will have a lot more opportunities to carve out playing time, but there will probably be some inconsistent stretches where just the bottom falls out for fantasy purposes. She had double-digit ESPN fantasy points in each of her games with double-digit minutes, but she had just 4 points and an assist against the Dream. I think it's worth noting that in that game against the Dream, it was an 18-point loss. It was pretty close throughout the game until the Dream pulled away in the 4th quarter. But the fact that she played 24 minutes against the Sun and they were able to get the win while she put up 16 points, I think that'll really bode well for her case going forward, where there will be some disappointing fantasy performances, and I would probably put her more in like the streaming plus category at this point, where like if you're in a really deep league, it's probably worth keeping her on your roster. But if you're in like 8 teams or less, she's someone that you can probably still put on the waiver wire just to get those games in every week. And if you get her back, great. But I don't think that the fantasy manager who would pick her up would necessarily be keeping her for the entire season. So I think that she'll have a lot more opportunities, but just some inconsistency for sure.
Yeah, Jeff, I don't know if you tuned in last Monday, but after the Courtney Vandersloot injury news, out for the season, Hailey Van Lith, I was like, I think the fantasy fallout of that injury is just buy Hailey Van Lith. She's the best season-long fantasy ad that you can have. Obviously, she was available in a lot of ESPN leagues. And then, she proceeded to play 4 minutes in the very next game, and everyone probably dropped her after that. But this is exactly why I viewed her as a season-long target and not necessarily just a streaming candidate. She's going to have games. She's a rookie. She's going to have games where there's just a bad matchup or she has a couple bad turnovers and she gets yanked. But she's also going to have games where the shot's falling and the offense is running smoothly when she's out there. So that's a very tough thing to have in fantasy. But it's one of those things where if you are going to if you think you're going to play the streaming game with Hailey Van Lith, you're just going to lose out because someone is going to snatch her up after she has one of those big games, right? I think Van Lith right now is you either buy it or you don't. You either pick her up and you keep her on your roster and you hope that maybe she strings together a multi-week stretch where she's playing 25 plus minutes and averaging 10 points. But other than that, but if you don't think that's going to happen, there's no reason to really stream her because she's not a good streaming candidate. She's going to be one of those players that, you're hoping for 20 points and she gets you 4, right?
Yeah, and I would absolutely say that out of the guard options who could step up in Vandersloot's absence, Van Lith probably has the most upside for
Oh,
sure.
yeah. Yes.
Yeah, outside
Very
of
high
like,
upside for sure.
yeah, for sure. But there might just be some disappointing performances that you have to live with if you're going to have her on your roster, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. There are worse candidates out there for that, for
Yeah.
those purposes. But thanks so much for that question. Um, Moving on to another trade candidate, we don't yet have a firm return timetable for Cameron Brink, but we're halfway through June, so it seems likely that she'll be back in action in the coming weeks. The biggest report that we got on Brink's return timetable came on draft night when Holly Rowe reported that she was expected back sometime in June. Well, it's now June. We're halfway through, so theoretically, in the coming weeks, she should be back in action. Maybe it's early July, but it feels like it'll probably be sooner rather than later. Fantasy managers who have her on their roster are probably aware of this, so it probably won't be easy to acquire her. But you could also see about offering a lower tiered player or two in exchange for her while she's still hurt, especially if that fantasy manager has struggled early in the season, or maybe they also have a few players who have left for Eurobasket, so they're dealing with multiple absences at this point that maybe they can't afford to hold Brink the way that they could earlier in the season, and you might be able to get her for a discount at this point.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Brink's blocks as a rookie made her a stellar fantasy player, and when she's on the court, she's going to be a must start player at every game. So don't mind that one at all. Um, you know, let's just talk about these aces real quick. Like I said, I'm sticking with this 10-game thing here. The aces have played only 10 games and they have a bunch of star power. So Jackie Young is a player that I'd like to go after. She's averaging a career high 19 points per game. She's had to step up with Kelsey Plum no longer there on the offensive side of the floor. Even if Asia comes back in the next couple of games, I think Jackie is still going to be a top producer for this team, and I expect the Aces to, hit their stride here soon. And I think Jackie will be a big part of that. And I think she's ready to take off and string together a couple of really like top fantasy performances.
For sure. And sticking with the Aces, this is a very ambitious target, but Asia Wilson's value may be at the lowest it will be all season, and maybe even for the next few years. Even while she's dealing with a concussion, any deal to acquire her would have to be a blockbuster. But it's possible that you could offer a low tier one or high tier two talent in order to get a player like Wilson, who I would definitely consider to be a high tier one, especially if her fantasy manager is in need of a boost. A prime player to offer might be someone like Satu Sabali, while maybe adding in like another mid-tier player. We've talked about Sabali extensively on this show, uh, and her biggest question mark for fantasy is usually her availability. She's appeared in each of the Mercury's first 12 games of the season and has been dominant, but she could have slightly less upside now that Kahleah Copper is healthy. And Sabali could also get some games to rest now that the team is close to full strength. So Sabali might be like a sell high candidate who's like peaking at just the right time to potentially get into Asia Wilson's very narrow buy low window.
Yeah. Sabali is peaking at the right time. Copper's going to come back, which might reduce her role a little bit. So get rid of her at the right time there. I like that a lot. My only comments when, transitioning into my pick too, it's so Asia Wilson is 8th in the league right now in ESPN fantasy points at 354. Arike Agumbawale is 9th at 352. And Sabrina Ionescu is 10th at 350. So those three players are separated by 4 ESPN fantasy points scored through a quarter of the way through the season. Asia Wilson has played 257 minutes. Arike Agumbawale has played 401 minutes. Sabrina Ionescu has played 302 minutes. So basically what that says is Asia Wilson is what we know. She is MVP, perennial MVP candidate, one of the best fantasy producers in WNBA history. And Arika Ogunbowale is just not nearly as efficient, nearly twice as many minutes to produce the same amount of fantasy points. And then my pick, my next trade target is Sabrina Ionescu, who's right behind Arika Ogunbowale. And the reason why Arika Ogunbowale has more minutes is because Dallas has played 2 more games than the Liberty, right? So my trend here is maybe starting to make a little bit of sense. So Ionescu has scored just as many fantasy points as Arika Ogunbowale up to this point, but has played 2 less games. Ionescu is going to need to lead the Liberty. Natasha Cloud, Brianna Stewart, Jonquel Jones, they're all veterans. Ionescu's in her prime. I think she leads this team. She's the go-to player. And then you get that extra 2-game boost there that makes Ionescu just better than the other players around her in fantasy right now.
Absolutely. And Ionescu's 3-point efficiency from 2023, where she shot 44.8% from beyond the arc on 7.9 attempts per game, that looks to be an anomaly. She looks to be closer to her career average of like around 33%. But the volume is still certainly there that she will have enough 3-point volume to have plenty of fantasy upside night in and night out. And I think that she's a really strong trade candidate for the reasons you mentioned, that like she just doesn't have the total points yet, but the average points are certainly there. And then Jeff asked another question of what player would we say is ready to take off? I think one player who has already shown a lot of promise early in the season is Kahleah Thornton. And the Valkyries are one team who are dealing with several Eurobasket absences. Janelle Salon is gone. Temi Fagbenley is gone. And I think they have a few other players as well. Like Julie Van Leeuw has also left the team. That was kind of to be expected for Golden State with how many international players that they have. But Kahleah Thornton has already posted 3 consecutive double-doubles. She had a pretty good start to the season while also having a few like slightly shaky performances. But I think that she'll be a lot more consistently dominant over the next month. And I think that could also parlay into the rest of the season, where she'll just be able to naturally have a bigger role even once the rest of her teammates come back from overseas.
Yeah, and I like this. It's an open-ended question, Jeff. Here, if you're saying like a star player that hasn't really like gotten to where you were expecting them, Angel Reese would be my pick. If you're talking about a player that hasn't really gotten playing time and is ready to explode, I would say Haley Van Lith. If you say, hey, Chicago Sky fans, stop giving me Chicago Sky players, I would say Lee Ueru could be a huge factor here in Dallas. She's a talented player. When she gets opportunities, she puts up numbers, but the opportunities just haven't been there. Coming over from Seattle, huge front court in Seattle, just couldn't see the playing time there. Now is in Dallas, who doesn't have Tierra McCowan, doesn't have Louisa's say her last name again so I don't mispronounce it.
I think it's Geiselsloder.
Yeah, so 2 big absences in the front court for Dallas, and Ueru comes in and should have a big role right away. Misha Hines-Allen is the only other center on this roster, and then you got Melissa Smith and Maddie Siegrist as the top forward. So I think Ueru could just be one of those players that's not rostered in 1% of leagues and could be on some starting lineups this week and next week.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a really good question. Thanks for sending it in, Jeff. We have a busy week ahead of us in the WNBA, including the first 6-game slate of the season on Tuesday, which features every team in action except for the Mercury. But then the Phoenix then has a back-to-back Wednesday and Thursday. I really hope Asia Wilson is back in action in time for Tuesday's game against the Lynx, although it may be tough since she's in the concussion protocol. Even though the Aces have appeared more mortal this year than in previous seasons, that it'd still be a fun matchup to watch at full strength.
Yeah, the second half of that back-to-back for Las Vegas could get interesting, like we talked about with Phoenix getting fully healthy. But again, the back-to-back for Phoenix could be interesting when they play Las Vegas. But I don't think the Copper, Thomas, Sabali trio is going to play in both halves of those games, just given their injury history. But there's just a ton of fun games on this schedule. Like I was saying, the Dream are playing well. They have a matchup against the Liberty tomorrow. It just doesn't stop. Aces, Lynx, the Aces need to get back on track. You're hoping that Asia Wilson's going to be there. There's just Storm Aces. I feel like we were talking about litmus tests for Seattle last week. This is just a litmus test for the entire league. I feel like every team is going to have a big game or a couple of big games where they really find out where they fall in the standings.
Absolutely. And then just going back to Jeff's question real quick to close out the show, Ginger's chiming in that she thinks Dominique Malanga will take off now that Lee Ueru is in Dallas and Ezi Magbegor can get into foul trouble. I think that's really great analysis, Ginger. Dominique Malanga hasn't had the playing time that we had expected of a number 2 pick to start the season. But now that Ueru is gone, that should free up some more minutes. And especially if Magbegor gets into foul trouble, we know that Malanga has the talent. And I think that she'll really get a chance to showcase it now that Ueru is with the Wings.
Yeah, Ginger, I would love for that statement to be true. I'm just pumping my brakes a little bit and waiting for my moment to espouse happiness for Dominique and Seattle. But after having just 6 minutes on Saturday, it was tough for me to sponsor this. Before that 6-minute outing, a 6-point game 2 and a loss. So it's just kind of like just not trusted by the coaching staff right now in close games. But before that, she had played double-digit minutes in 6 of 7 games, and the only game she didn't, she played 9. So yeah, I think it's coming eventually. I think if we say I think Malanga will take off. Yes, yes, I think she will take off. Now, I don't necessarily think that trading Ueru is going to create a huge opening. Ueru wasn't playing 35 plus minutes. I think a couple of extra minutes will go to Ezi. But like you said, foul trouble, injuries. Dominique is just one foul trouble game away, one injury away from getting that role that we've been waiting for sure, Ginger. And I'm excited for that to happen too.
For sure. This has been some great dialogue. Let's keep it going in the comments, but that does it for this week's show. We'll be back next Monday at 1 p.m. Central, so be sure to join us then. Thanks for watching.